Almajestar, Astroea, Unica is a new deck from D-BT09, one of the two decks from that set for Dark States. And it has a really unique mechanic around it where you bind critical triggers specifically in order to get effects on your Vanguard swing. And at first, when this deck was revealed and they just kind of showed the art for her, I was interested to see how it was going to go. And then once we finally saw how the effect worked, like many people, I was kind of confused to see how that would actually play out and be consistent. But it's actually not as bad as it might seem initially. And I've actually been testing this quite a bit, and she's actually pretty decent. Of course, right now on the Japanese side of things, we have the Unica Mask, which is somewhat, I guess, an upgraded version of this card, which is a bit different, but we'll talk about that later on. But today I just want to go over the list that I have for Unica. So Unica has two effects. Auto on Vanguard, circle when a trigger unit is soul blasted for the cost of this unit's ability. Choose one of your units and it gets 5k to the end of the turn. Then, when this unit attacks a Vanguard, soul blast 3, bind all critical triggers soul blasted for this cost, and perform all of the following according to the number of critical triggers in your bind zone. If you have one or more, choose one of your opponent's rear guards and retire it. 2 or more, this unit gets a critical to the end of the battle. 3 or more, this unit gets +1 drive until the end of the battle. Now, you might, like many people, think initially like, wow, that's kind of obnoxious. I have to soul blast critical triggers every time to get the effect. No. Essentially what you need to do with Unica is get up to 3 critical triggers in your soul as quickly as possible, or if not, into your bind zone using other cards, which might actually be just one card at the time, and just get those 3 critical triggers in your bind zone, and that'll automatically activate all of Unica's effects whenever she attacks. You just have to make sure you have the 3 soul in order to actually pay the cost to get this effect to go off. Then you want to also try and fill up with as many other triggers that are not criticals into your soul, so you can soul blast them out for her cost, and then trigger the first part of her skill where you can give 5k to your units, and then recycle those triggers constantly. Because if you try to recycle your critical triggers, they're just going to get bound every single time, and you're going to run out of triggers to recycle back into your soul. So you want to put in your heals and your draws back into your soul as much as you can, so Unica can soul blast them out, give 5k, put them back into soul, next turn, rinse and repeat. Getting the ability to retire, get a crit, and also triple drive makes Unica actually pretty powerful when you can consistently get off her skill. Because on your first grade 3 turn, you're able to swing in with a 13k Vanguard that has triple drive, as well as a critical that can retire one of your opponent's units, which is very good. Now, when it comes to actually recycling your triggers, you have a lot of different ways to do this. For example, your own ride line, which we'll get into in a bit. But the best ways to do this are with the cards that we received in this set, in the Copernicus and the Griffin here, which allow you to very easily recycle your triggers around. Then, since you need to dig into your deck in order to actually be able to find these triggers, since you can't rely on just drawing them or drive checking them, we play the gun ram to not only soul charge, but also soul blast out the soul that we have. Because we can amass soul relatively easily and use that in order to draw cards and get some advantage. And we can very easily use gun ram to soul charge, soul blast, draw, and then use the Griffin and the Copernicus to fill up our soul once again. Finally, our main key component for how this deck works is the Clean Sweep Dragon here, which is a very powerful removal ability, as well as giving itself a lot of power. So it is very important for this deck in order to end out the game, because it allows you to remove a lot of your opponent's pesky units, such as maybe their Obscavators if you're playing Eva, or Chrono Jet's board that they can establish. You can go ahead and remove all that, as well as give yourself a 15k power bonus. And if needed, you can fill up your own soul. One clean sleep on 3 of your units gives you the ability to use Unica's skill right away. It also swings in with 25 just using its skill alone without having to persona ride. Of course, you can only use the skill when you persona ride, so it's actually going to be hitting in for 35, which is a very good number to hit, and you can obviously make that hit a lot better using a booster or using Unica's skill. So these guys are all the main components for at least the build that I have today, and let's go over each one of them. First things first, we'll go over the ride line as usual. We're just playing the Mochi from the actual ride line for Unica. You can, as was brought up a couple of times before Unica was released, you can actually put a critical trigger in your ride deck as your first Vanguard here. This has a couple of different effects on your deck. One, you actually get an extra space in your deck that you can fill up instead of having to have a grade 0 that for pretty much every deck fills no purpose. So you get an extra card in your deck. This does mean your deck will have one less trigger that you can drive check, but it does mean that Unica starts out with 1 critical trigger already in deck, which means you just need to get 2 more, so you can actually very quickly fill out the requirements for Unica. I have tested it out a little bit, and honestly, it did not make a huge difference. When it came to testing, it was either I still did not have enough, even with starting with 1, or without this, even if I didn't have this, I ended up seeing the other 3 triggers anyways. But I encourage you to try it out. It is an option that you can give a shot. Next up, we've got ourselves Almajestar Shorts Sparta, the grade 1 for Almajestar, followed by the grade 2 Almajestar Turin Diana, and then of course we've got Unica, Almajestar Astroea Unica, in the grade 3 slot for our ride deck. The ride deck for Unica is actually built really well. I can't say that I would recommend using any of the other ones, but feel free to experiment if you'd like. Sparta here has 2 skills. When this unit is rode upon by Dinah, you can soul charge 2, and if a critical trigger was so charged, you draw a card. I've been made aware that the way this works is even if you soul charge 2 critical triggers, you only draw 1 card, because it's an if, not a when. It's not when you soul charge a critical trigger, it's if at any point you soul charge a critical trigger from this skill, you just draw a card, not for each. Then she has another skill, act on rearguard circle once per turn. If your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, find a trigger unit from your soul, and this unit gets 10k until the end of that turn. So this skill I originally thought was from drop. When I thought that, I thought, wow, this is amazing. I can very easily just remove a trigger or bind a trigger from drop and not have to worry about cycling into soul, but it actually removes it from soul, which isn't half bad. The 10k is really massive, but you probably won't be seeing this skill too often, especially because you have to be on grade 3. But it's usually only when you have extra soul and maybe you haven't used or seen any of your gun rams, you can go into this to get a nice beefy attacker or a booster. Next up, we've got Almajestar Turin Dinah here, who has the skill that says, auto when this unit is brought upon by a unit with Astroea in its card name, choose the Sparta from your soul, call that card and this unit to rear guard circle. So that's actually a really useful skill to be able to call both of them out. You can use the skill of the grade 1 if you'd like. You can also conserve some hand by not having to call out units, because this just gives you a column right away just from riding. Then we have the skill on rearguard circle, which is actually very useful. And once per turn, act. If you have a Vanguard with Almajestar in its card name, you can counterblast 1. Choose 2 triggers from your drop, put them into soul, and this unit gets 5k until the end of the turn. So obviously this has the ability to fill out your soul with 2 triggers, and also gets 5k, so she can swing in by herself. So very useful grade 2. Many decks actually play this, or many builds I should say, play this in the main deck at additional copies. Spoiler alert, we will not be doing that today. Moving on to the grade 3s, we're going to be playing 3 copies of Unica in the main deck, so we can persona ride, as well as a singular copy of the Gratis Grado, so we can also persona ride. And then finally 2 copies of Reaper in the Shadows, Zelmort. So we're playing here 3 copies of the Persona Ride here. We want to Persona Ride as much as possible in this deck because we want to try and finish off our opponents on the Persona Ride turn, as well as enable our clean sweep to disable their board and get a lot of power. The reason being is that you run out of gas eventually with Unica, and you can also end up decking out from the drive checks and the soul charging that you're doing. The reason you just run out of gas is just because you do end up pulling triggers out from your deck, so your deck isn't as threatening late game. But Persona Ride gives you a lot of big numbers. This is unfortunately a 3-attack deck, so you gotta get those numbers as big as you can, and Persona Riding will help you do that. Having a Vanguard that can swing in for 23, a crit, and triple drive is pretty threatening on its own, especially if you give it a booster. For that same reason, we're playing the Gratis Gradle here. This is a Regalia piece. You can only have one Regalia piece in your deck. You can only use it once per fight, so even if you find a way to get this back into your hand after you use it, you won't be able to use it. This has a skill where if you have a Vanguard that is a grade 3 with Persona Ride, and you did not ride this turn, you can play this and you just activate Persona Ride. So it just counts as a Persona Ride. You draw a card and all of your front row units for the rest of this turn get 10k, and it counts as a Persona Ride, so any skills that are triggered based on a Persona Ride will be activated by the use of this cup. Then finally we've got ourselves the Reaper in Shadows Zelmort here. This is, I believe I mentioned this in the Drag Jeweled list, that I've been finding ways to sneak this in into just about every single Dark States deck. I think this is one of the best cards that was released for Dark States. If this was a grade 2, it'd probably be more recognized as a really good card. But Zelmort here has one simple skill. Act on Rearguard Circle, you counterblast 1, put this unit into Soul, look at the top 2 cards of your deck, choose up to 1 card from among them, call it to rear, and put the rest into your Soul. So at worst, this gives you enough Soul for Gunram to Soul Blast and draw you a card. At best, you can look at the top 2 cards of your deck and either see 2 critical triggers, which, you know, horrible, would have been nice to check those, but if you need them for Unica's skill, there you go. And it can also let you search out your deck for your other units, such as your Griffins, your Copernicuses, your Gunrams, your clean sweeps. You can search them out using this card. I used to play this at 3, but we're just gonna stick to 2 for now, because I usually just need to use him just once, and at 2 I see him just often enough when I need to. 3 seems to be a little bit too clunky. There's no reason why I want to play 3 of these, but that'll be dependent on a card in the grade 2 slot, which we'll talk about next. For the grade 2s, we got ourselves 4 copies of the Klitz Peak Griffin, 4 copies of the Clean Sweep Dragon, and then finally 3 copies of the Ultra Sound Siri. Klitz Peak Griffin here has 2 very useful skills for Unica. When it's placed on rear, if you have a Vanguard with Almajestar in its card name, choose 2 trigger units from your drop, put them into your Soul. This works also on the grade 2 because it does have Almajestar in its name, so you can play this early. However, you will not be able to make use of the second skill here, which says on rear or on Guardian Circle, if your Binding Zone has a critical trigger, this unit gets 5k shield and 5k attack. So you can't really play this early and then intercept with it with a 10k shield, because to my knowledge, there's no way to really bind your critical triggers before grade 3. I've looked, and I know Dark States pretty well, and I might have missed something, but there's just no way to do that right now. But you can still throw this out, and then as soon as you go into Unica, this is continuous, so it will activate at that point, but mainly you use this to put your triggers back into your Soul. And you can loop them with Gunram and so on and so forth to Soul Blast and then put them right back into Soul. Along with the Griffin, the Clean Sweep Dragon here is actually going to be your main attacker. The Clean Sweep has 1 skill that says, if you Persona roll this turn, act once per turn. On Rearguard Circle, you can counterblast 1, choose up to a total of 3 of you and your opponent's rear guards, and both of you put those chosen rear guards into Soul, their own respective Souls. Then this unit gets 5k into the end of the turn for each card put into Soul, or I should say just chosen by this effect. So this has, you know, multiple uses. You can put in your own units into Soul to fill up for either Gunram or Unica's skills. You can also use this to get rid of your opponent's units, which is very good because it just puts them into Soul. So something that has retire protection, such as the Obscavates thanks to the order, does not matter. You still put those into Soul because you're not retiring. The only thing that can't be affected by this is things that have resist, that say they cannot be chosen by your opponent's card effects, which isn't too many, but just mainly things like M-Picks, right? This gets 15k from doing this. So on top of the fact that you're on Persona Ride, this is going to be swinging in for a hefty 35k, which is a really good number to hit on its own. But you combine that with a booster, as well as 5k from Unica's skill for Soul Blasting out a trigger, you can have this guy swing in for a nice whopping 48k, which is also a very good magic number to hit. So the main game plan is to get this guy out, clear out your opponent's field, and try to close out the game with him and his massive swing, along with the Griffin, who can hit similar numbers, and Unica, who has the crit and the triple drive. For the most part, the entire deck, I think I have down packed, and the engine all works really well. But there is a 4-card slot that I wasn't able to really nail down and find something useful in, and even in what's coming out in the future doesn't seem to fulfill what I want for this 4-card slot. So for the time being, I've tried out a couple of things, but I've settled on the Ultrasound series here. This has a skill where this is placed on rearguard circle. You can counterblast 1. Look at the top 3 cards of your deck. Choose a card from among them, put it into your soul, shuffle your deck, and if your soul has 4 or more cards with different grades, you draw a card. This is one of the reasons why I wanted to add in an extra Zelmort, just to have a couple more grade 3s, so that this becomes more of a plus rather than just Counterblast 1, Soul Charge 1. It could be Counterblast, Soul Charge, Draw 1, which is pretty decent for the cost of Counterblast. You don't really use a lot of Counterblast in this deck, even if you have different builds of it. You don't need Counterblast for Unica's skill, so you're free to fill that out with whatever you want. I want a much better way to use my Counterblast, but I can't seem to find anything super effective at the time being, aside from the Clean Sweep Dragon. So we just have this here just as an extra grade 2, just to have some sort of selective soul charging, so instead of just blindly soul charging and, you know, losing triggers, which we're bound to do anyways, giving myself the illusion of choice. This grade 2 here, 3 copies of it, and a grade 1 that I'm playing 1 copy of it, you're more than welcome to swap it out for whatever you want. I'll go over some options towards the end, and feel free to experiment with whatever makes you feel comfortable. Moving over to the grade 1s, we've got ourselves 4 copies of Steam Battler Gunram here. We got ourselves 4 copies of Aram Copernicus, which is, I assume you say that name. 1 copy of the Inhale Pits, and then 4 copies of the Repelled Malice Dragon as our PG. Steam Battler Gunram is a unit from set 1 that had lived in pretty obscurity for a long time and has now become one of the most played cards, or one of the most sought out cards in Dark States, it seems. He has 2 simple skills. When its unit is placed on rearguard circle, you soul charge 1, then act on rearguard circle once per turn, soul blast 3, draw a card. This card is very good in this deck because it allows you to soul charge 1, thin out your deck. You can also use it to try and hit a critical trigger. You can use it to rush in early. Then it also has an act skill that lets you soul blast 3 to draw a card. So you can try and amass some hand with this card. You tend to get a lot of soul with Unica, and oftentimes it's not always what you need. And you can also very easily put cards back into your soul after you use Gunran skill. So sometimes this draw becomes pretty free, which is very useful in this deck because you tend to play out a lot of cards, and the triple drive doesn't really fill up your hand just enough. So Gunram is very much needed, especially to search out pieces to actually be able to hit the 3 crits in bind that you need. Then we've got ourselves the Aram Copernicus. I'm just gonna say Copernicus, even though I think it's Capricornus, right? But anyways, this has the skill where auto on rearguard circle when its unit boosts. If you have a Vanguard with Almajestar in its card name, choose up to 1 trigger unit from your hand or drop, put it into soul. If you put the trigger unit from your hand, you draw a card. So this you can use as early as turn 1, put it behind your Vanguard, boost. Since you have an Almajestar, you can go ahead and put basically what you discarded for your ride, which sometimes is a trigger since you want to put those into soul, and you can very easily amass your soul this way. You can also put this behind your Unica. Whenever it boosts, you can trigger Unica's skill to soul blast 3. Since the timing of that happens at the same time, you can then use the skill afterwards of this card to put one of those triggers that you just soul blasted back into your soul, assuming of course it wasn't a crit that got bound. You can also use this to take your triggers, your draw triggers in hand, put them into Soul, and draw a card. Ideally, exchange it for something that has a little bit more shield value, maybe, or just a little bit more use, depending on what state you are in the game. Then finally, we got ourselves Inhale Pit here, which is a card from set 7 that I'm really happy to see is actually seeing some play now, because I really like the art. And it was a card that seemed to be printed for the Altar Slaughter, a random budget grade 3 Vanguard that focused on grade 0s, and it was not very good, so it kind of seemed wasted to use just pretty art on a deck that really can't do anything. But thankfully they at Bushy Road thought ahead, and you can actually use this in Unica now. She has the skill where act on regular circle once per turn. You can Soul Blast one grade 1 or greater card, choose 2 grade 0 cards from your drop, put them into your Soul. So this can of course count for your starter, your grade 0 starter, but mainly you'll be using this to put in triggers from your drop into Soul. So you can very easily, if you have 4 Soul Blast out 3 for Gun Ram, and if you Soul Blast it out 2 triggers, you can Soul Blast out the remaining card and put 2 of them back into Soul. This is the card that I was mentioning that in combination with the grade 2 Siri, you can swap this 4-card slot out for something else. I kind of threw in Inhale Pit because of a couple of the cards that I tried out I had a couple of bad results with, so I just threw in Inhale Pit just for a little bit more consistency. Finally, for the grade 1s, we got the Repelled Malice Dragon, which is our Sentinel. You can only have up to 4 cards that have the ability Sentinel in your deck. When it's placed on Guardian Circle, you choose one of your units and it cannot be hit to the end of the battle. Then, if you have 2 or more cards, you choose a card from your hand and discard it. If you have 1 or no cards in your hand, you don't have to discard from this, which is good. We're playing 4 of these just because I'm too lazy to get the Elementia Sanctitude. If you can, play a copy of Elementia Sanctitude in your deck in replace for one of these Sentinels, because you can use it in a lot of tricky matchups and tricky situations because it's the Blitz order. It doesn't actually go on Guardian Circle, and it can be used for free if your opponent's Vanguard is 4 or higher, and your Vanguard is grade 3. But we just use this for defensive purposes. There's a card that I was trying to use to be able to cycle out these PGs from Soul, which we'll go over in the options, but it didn't work out very well, unfortunately. Otherwise, I think Unica would probably be a little bit better because she'd have a lot more defensive options. For the triggers, I've kind of already alluded to it, but we're going to be playing 4 of the Steam Deviate. Arguably, you don't have to play the Steam Deviate. It makes the most sense in this deck because you specifically need critical triggers in your Soul. But again, in all of my testing, and I've tested the deck quite a bit, you don't really ever play it down and actually put it into Soul. So you can get away with normal critical triggers, of which we're playing 4 of as well. We're going to be playing 4 of the Effect Draw trigger because we do want to see cards in our hand. We want to fill up our hand because we are playing a lot of cards out. You could try playing the Effect Front triggers as well to give yourself a little bit more shield value as well as make your front row a lot more threatening. But I do think you will need the draws just to make sure you see all the cards that you need. We're going to be playing 4 of the regular heal triggers. I don't feel like the old Effect heal triggers are as effective right now, but there's also a new heal trigger that we got in set 9, and I'm kind of considering playing that, but for now we're just going to stick to the 4 regular heals. And then finally we're going to be playing the Dark States Over trigger. Once again, as usual, we'll have the argument here for whether or not you can play Obaria or not. I've heard, I think in some of the Japan list for Unica Mask, they're considering playing it. I think that the Dark States Over trigger is very crucial for Unica because of the fact that she already comes with a crit. Giving her another crit in 10k as well as a triple drive is just amazingly massive, right? If you can somehow check this on turn 1, I find it very hard to believe that you'll be able to lose unless you just don't see your critical triggers to bind. But being able to swing in, especially with, Persona Ride, getting you up to 33 in combination with the 10k power buff this gives, going in with 3 crits that you can swing in at your opponent, as well as triple drive, is just extremely good. You can definitely try out the Obaria, but I think being able to check this and essentially steal the game is just too big of an opportunity to pass up on. Alright, for the options, let's go over this one right away. I've seen a lot of people considering the Boltus and the Selfish or Shining Selfishness combo here. Shining Selfishness is a Blitz order that says Soul Blast 4. Vanguard gets 5k for each card in your damage zone. You can combine this with Boltus, who says whenever you Soul Blast 3, you Counterblast 1. I believe he gets 5k, and then you take one of the cards that were Soul Blasted, put it back into your soul, and then you choose one of your opponent's rear guards and retire it if it's the same grade. So you can do this on your opponent's turn where you use Shining Selfishness, and then retire one of your opponent's rear guards, which means they basically just lose an attack. I feel like this is a little bit too expensive to try and do in between making sure that before Unica attacks, you have enough soul for her Soul Blast 3, and then making sure that after she attacks, she still has Soul Blast 4 for you to be able to use on your opponent's turn, as well as having these two cards out. But I just thought I would mention it. Some people also just play Boltus by himself without the Shining Selfishness, because you can still use it to swing in for 18k and also retire one of your opponent's units, which you can use in combination with Unica Seal to just be very control heavy. So that's another option that you can play. Then there's also the Lin, Friend of the Netherworld Lin. I had Lin in the deck, and then I was very high on playing Lin. I actually had played 4 copies of Lin. Then I got into a situation where I looked at the top of my deck, and it was Overtrigger PG. And I had to put the PG into my soul, and then put the Overtrigger on the bottom of my deck. And I was like, that really sucked. That would have really turned the game around for me. So because of that, I've taken out Lin, but I think she's a pretty decent option just to be able to look at top 2 on place, and then choose one, put it into soul, choose the other one, put it at the bottom of your deck. Then we've got the Indicate Arrow Dragon, which is a very interesting tech that I saw online from this user that I'll put on screen. I don't remember the name at the moment, but they were using this in a sort of budget list for Unica, where the mentality behind this is that if you soul charge your triggers, that's fine. If you, for example, have a heal or a PG in your soul, and you reveal it from the top card in your deck, then you don't actually have to soul charge it because it'll have the same name as something that's in your soul, and this only lets you soul charge if it has a different name from what's in your soul. So this just becomes on place reveal 1 sometimes. So it's an interesting option. It lets you look at the top card. If it's already in your soul, if it's like a PG, you keep PG in your soul. Then you can use Gun Ram, draw the PG, add it to your hand, stuff like that. So it's pretty interesting. I don't think it's that worth it, but it does have some interesting applications. This is the card that I was talking about. This is another card from sets 7 that focuses on grade 0s, the Steady Spiky. I was trying to use this early on in builds of this deck to try and get PGs for my soul, but there were just not enough times where I had both this card and the PG and soul to actually make use of this. This says when placed from hand, Counterblast 1, put a grade 0 from your hand into soul, choose a grade 1 from your soul and put it into your hand. So you basically take the PG in your soul, swap it out with a trigger in your hand, ideally critical trigger, so use for Unica skill. You can also use this to sort of use your soul as a resource. If you have a gun ram, you can pull it out. But there's just not enough grade 1s where it warrants it, or I should say not enough useful grade 1s where it warrants pulling it out aside from a PG. Then we've got the Dragon Tree Wrench Demon Shrider from set 9. The first skill to play a Dragon Tree marker is useless for us until we go into the mask. Then it says if your Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, Soul Blast 2, choose one of your grade 1 or less units from your soul column to rear in the same column as this unit. Once again, not super useful, but does let you use your soul as a resource in order to pull out cards from soul and put them on field. You can play the Gun Ram, who lets you soul charge 1, so it just becomes Soul Blast. Well, it's technically Soul Blast 3 because you pull out a card from your soul, and it just makes it actually Soul Blast 2 with the Gun Ram. But just thought I would mention it. I don't think it's a very viable option. As I mentioned, here's the new heal trigger, Direful Doll Charmaine here, who says if your Vanguard's grade is less than your opponent's Vanguard, this unit gets 10k into the end of battle, so it becomes a 20k shield. In the current landscape right now, where a lot of people are playing Chronojet, who goes into grade 4s during battle, this becomes very powerful. Otherwise, it's not as good. Once we get other things like Messiah and maybe some of the grade 4 decks coming back into relevancy, I think this will be very good. In general, it's not a bad option if you know you're going to be seeing a lot of Jet. This gives you 20k shield. From set 9, we also have the Steam Skara Zargon, which might see a lot of play in Chronojet. We in English did not get the brainwash restriction, so this might not see play, I don't know. But this has the skill where you choose one of your units that this unit boosts, and it gets the ability where Vanguard or Rearguard circle. If the attack hits a Vanguard, you can choose up to 2 cards from your drop, put them into your soul. So just again, recursion from drop. You have enough cards that let you do this. You don't need to wait until battle to do this, so I don't think this is very useful in Unica, but it's worth a shot. Then finally, the last card we will talk about here is the Byracor or Byrakan Manticore. It's a very simple skill that says during your turn, if your buying zone has 2 or more trigger units, this unit gets 10k. So this is a huge 20k beater, 30k on Persona Ride that you can try and use in this build if you'd like. For example, I expect a lot of you to take out the 4 cards that I mentioned and play this instead, which is fine. I originally thought this was a must-have, but within talking with my friend Wolferin on Twitter and also just testing the deck out myself, this card really isn't that great. All it does is give you 20k, it doesn't help you amass soul in any way, it's useless on turns 2 and 3 unless you manage to get the requirements. So it doesn't really do a lot and provide a lot to the deck other than just being a beat sick. Even then, clean sweep hits for higher numbers, so he's not super useful, but you know, having 20k, 30k is not a bad option. Alright, let's try a new little segment to these deck profile videos. Rather than telling you how to play Unica, we're going to go over how to defeat Unica here, and more or less how to play against her. Unfortunately, for the way Unica works, there's not really a lot you can do to counterplay her, since like a lot of Dark States deck, they kind of just do their own thing without you really even being involved. But there are a couple of things that you can keep in mind. For example, if you see the clean sweep dragon, just about every Unica list plays this if they can. Keep in mind that this will come down on turn 4, so keep in mind if they have any of them in drop or in their drive checks or anything like that, or in damage, but expect this to come out. Don't try and fully commit stuff that you really need on board to, for example, guard or something like that, because they will more than likely be gone. Likewise, you can maybe be a little bit more aggressive with your soul, because the clean sweep might fill your soul that way. Do not forget that the Peak Griffin here is also a 10k shield. When you try to calculate how much damage you can put and how much shield value your opponent has, this does count as a 10k shield, so don't forget this might be in their hand or on field. The Copernicus here, if you're looking for retired targets, is a very good retired target or bot deck target, because this gives them a lot of value as the game goes on, because they'll constantly get a card back, which makes Unica's skill Soul Blast 2 instead of Soul Blast 3, which is a lot more manageable than when it's just Soul Blast 3. The gun ram is not really that important for them if you want, unless they have like a huge amount of cards in soul, but I would relatively ignore the gun ram if you're retiring it late game. Early game, if you do see the gun ram out and they try to swing in with it, if you have the capability to get rid of it, get rid of it. Otherwise, I don't think it's really going to hurt the Unica player all that much. Other than that, I would say don't be too scared of their drive checks. Keep count of where their triggers are at. You know that in order to get this ball rolling, they have to remove at least 3 of their critical triggers. So this means worst case scenario, they check 2 triggers on you turns 1 and 2. But more than often, they ended up having to discard that from hand or soul charge it or something of the sort. So just keep in mind that they're kind of going to be playing with 3 triggers minimum less, and just try to keep track of all of their triggers when it comes to the drive checks, because aside from the crit, Unica might just be swinging in blanks sometimes. So just keep that in mind and make sure you count where those triggers are at. Other than that, keep in mind that there is a retire that can choose anywhere. It's not just front row retire, it's also back row retire, it's anywhere. So just be careful with your units when you throw them out. If you have very important units that you need to stay on board, they will get popped. Then when it comes to the Mulligan, there is just a few things you'd like to keep in mind. Obviously, if you can hold on to a critical trigger, that would be nice. It does kind of suck that you can't just put all your triggers back when you mulligan, but having just one to start with just help you out a lot. If you can find one of these 2 guys as soon as possible, that will help you out as well, just so you can get the early soul charge and the early card back. This and this is pretty great to have turn 1, and also just for the rest of the game, these give you a lot of value, even if it's just to rush in. Likewise, depending on what's in your hand, you can hold on to one of these two to use your early counterblast that you'll have, just to make sure that turn 3 you get the soul that you want. The Zelmort is a pretty nice option because it does give you access to 2 cards from the top of your deck, as well as the soul for the gun ram. The series is not a bad option to swing in early game, just if you want to try and get some cards in soul. You don't use your counterblast really until turn 3. I would not hold on to the Clean Sweep Dragon. You will eventually end up drawing it, unless you're playing against something like Eva and maybe you're only playing 3 of them, but I think you will more than likely eventually see the Queen Sweep Dragon here, who I keep saying Queen Sweep, so I would not hold on to this because it is a pretty dead card early on. If you can hold on to a Persona Ride or the Chalice, the priority being the Persona Ride, just so you can have an extra little bit of soul, that would be great as well, just so you can go in for your kill turn with it. And finally, of course, the Griffin, if you can hold on to that as well, just so you can try and put in cards into your soul. So, I would say the perfect hand to have post Mulligan is mainly these 3. So you have your Persona Ride, your Apprentice, and your Critical Trigger to get you started. And you can do any combination of these to fill up the rest, and you should be in a pretty good spot. Alright, so let's do a quick sample play here. This is actually a pretty decent hand pre-Mulligan. We will get rid of the Clean Sweep and the PG. You can keep these depending on the matchup here. But in general, I would like something that I can soul charge with. So we're just going to put those 2 back and got ourselves the Gun Ram as well as a Persona Ride, which is not half bad. I'll probably end up discarding the Chalice, but we'll see how things go. Alright, so let's go ahead and stand up our Vanguard here. We're going to go ahead and draw for turn, get the Clean Sweep. I always end up seeing this, which is why I don't want to start it in my starting hand, because it will end up there eventually. Let's go ahead and discard the Critical Trigger here and go into the Sparta. If we were going first, we would try and go in with the Gun Ram here, get some pressure, but we are not. In this situation, let's say we'll take 1. It is actually going to be a heal trigger, which is a little bit unfortunate, but not too bad because we can counterblast that and hope for another heal in order to put it into drop. Let's go ahead and draw here. We have ourselves the Inhale Pit, which currently is not very useful. So I think we'll discard, well, actually no. Maybe we'll discard the Clean Sweep Dragon because we don't need that at the moment. We'll go ahead and ride into the Dyna here, use the skill of the grade 1 to soul charge 2. Since one of the cards I soul charged was a Critical Trigger, I do draw 1. It is going to be a PG, which is honestly not very useful. So let's go ahead and put on the Gun Ram here. We're going to soul charge 1. It is going to be a draw trigger, which is fine. You can go ahead and use the skill of Gun Ram right away to soul blast out 2 triggers as well as something else here in order to draw 1. We're going to get another trigger, which could be worse. We'll play the Peak Griffin here, and we'll take these 2 triggers that we just soul blasted. Actually, we have a Critical Trigger. Let's grab that one instead of the Draw Trigger and put those back into soul. For next turn, we just need 1 more Critical Trigger, and we might be able to get something rolling right now. We can put down the Inhale Pit, try and rush in, but I might end up wanting to keep it. We'll throw her out here for now. If she goes, she goes. So we can just swing in here, pray we get the crit. No, we get the heal, which does actually let us heal the heal. So we can put that back into our deck later on. And then we'll swing in here. We'll probably take 2. Let's say they don't kill the Inhale Pit. I wish they did. I could have used that crit instead. Let's go ahead and draw for turn here. It's actually going to be the Clean Sweep Dragon that always comes in. Let's go ahead and discard this heal trigger in order to ride into our Unica here. Stand up our units. I believe the skill of Dyna here is actually mandatory. But we're gonna end up doing it anyway, so let's go ahead and do one of those. Let's go ahead and switch these 2 out here. Fortunately, we don't have anything like the Zelmort or anything to get us rolling further, so we'll counterblast 1 here in order to grab ourselves, it doesn't really matter. So we'll take these 2 triggers here, put it into Soul. We do have the option here to Soul Blast out 3. Actually, no, since everything is grade 0, we don't actually have that option right now, because we need another Peak Griffin or another Copernicus, which we haven't seen, unfortunately. So we're just going to have to go ahead and swing in here. We cannot use the skill of Sparta, because our opponent is presumably on grade 2 here. So we use the skill here to Soul Blast out 3. We're going to go ahead and put these 2 crits up here, and go ahead and put the other trigger in drop. So we have ourselves the 2 critical triggers. I'll maybe put it like this or something so you guys can see it. Which means that we do get to retire one of our opponent's rear guards here, as well as get a crit, which is very nice. And also, since we Soul Blasted out 3 triggers, we can give 5k to 3, or give out 5k 3 times, I should say here. So this already got an additional 5k, and this also has 5k because of the fact that we have 2, or just 1 bound, and then from the skill of counterblasting 1 to put triggers, she gets 5k. So you can really distribute it however you want. These guys are going to swing in for 23, so I'd give them at least each 5k, so they're swinging for 28, which is a very good number. And you can either give the 5 again to one of these other ones, or give it to Unica so she can swing in with a little bit more power here. But let's go in for our drive check, and let's scooch these guys over a little bit. Sorry, didn't know you guys were so out of frame. There we go. Let's go in for our drive check here. We're going to get a Persona Ride as well as a Gun Ram, which is fine. We can swing in here and swing in here. Our hand in terms of guarding is okay. We can maybe guard with the Peak Griffin to make sure we don't get obliterated here. We'll use the PG to get rid of the Chalice at this point, and probably take the over trigger. Alright, wish I had just taken the damage, which I probably would have done in that situation, but oh well. So let's go ahead and start our turn here. We do have the Zelmort, which is pretty interesting. So we're going to go ahead and Persona Ride here. We would like to get another critical trigger as soon as possible here, so let's go ahead and draw. So we have a couple of options here. We probably want to use the Inhale Pit, I'm guessing. Since I guarded like crazy, we only have the 1 counterblast here, which means we can do a couple of things. We can gamble on the Zelmort. We can overcall the crit and use the Dyna to put it back in, or we can do something else and pray that it works out for us. So we're going to call the critical trigger here, then we're going to overcall it with this Gun Ram. Use the skill of Gun Ram to Soul Charge 1. That is quite perfect there. And then we will overcall said Gun Ram with the Clean Sweep, which we probably want to use in this situation to counterblast 1. Make sure we have some pretty hefty columns here. Then we can use the Inhale Pits to... I guess we could use the Inhale Pit either way. We didn't have to Soul Charge, but Soul Charging is fine. So we will Soul Blast out the Unica, and then we can get ourselves the crits as well as a heal trigger. So we can actually Soul Blast out some more triggers here. There we go. So now we are in full command here. Had I used the Zelmort, I could have called out the Copernicus and used its skill, so that would have been okay also. And then we would have hit also a Gun Ram. So I could have called out either of those, so that would have been okay. Clean Sweep really depends on whether or not you have stuff on your opponent's board that you want to get rid of, which 9 out of 10 times you will. It also now swings in for 35. Regretfully, we can't use the skill of the Dyna to get her a little bit bigger, and we cannot use the skill of the Sparta because we do not have another trigger. We could technically use the skill of Sparta here if you'd like. Get rid of the heal, one of the heals, and then just Soul Blast out one of your other cards. If you want Unica to swing in with more power, up to you. But we'll go ahead and attack here. We will Soul Blast out 3 triggers here. Take the final crit and bind it here. Soul Blast out here. And I think in terms of power, our distribution would maybe be best to give 10k here, 5k here to even out. Have some pretty hefty columns here. Now Unica can retire one of your opponent's rear guards. She gets a crit, and she can also swing in with triple drive, which we'll go ahead and do. Check the gun ram, check the Copernicus, and then check a PG. As mentioned, drive checks are usually dry because I've already gone through, I think, like 8 of our triggers or something like that. But we do have these columns here to back us up. And that's generally how the game is going to go. Now the crits have been put in the bind zone. We just kind of have to go with the game as it is. We probably don't need the gun ram anymore, or maybe, no, we probably don't need the gun ram anymore. Go ahead and draw here. We got the Peak Griffin, which is nice. Let's go ahead and Persona Ride and draw here. And draw here. And we get ourselves another critical trigger, which is a bit unfortunate. We do have enough counterblast here because just take a bunch of damage, so we can do a lot of things here. We can overcall Dyna and try and get with the Zelmort, see if we get something good from the top 2. We get a PG and a crit, so those aren't the best options here. We can overcall Dyna with the Peak Griffin to put in some triggers, which is the better option. We can also overcall the Inhale Pit with the Copernicus to get more recycle, and also go ahead and use the gun ram in combination with all those skills in order to try and get some cards in hand. Since we can Soul Blast out 3 cards here and between our units get enough triggers, we would probably call the Copernicus here instead. So for example, let's say we do Soul Blast out 3. Unfortunately, I do know it is going to be a PG. We can then overcall, put this here, and we could use the skill here first if we wanted to. So depending on how many triggers we have 2, and we have 2 more, so we can do that. Then overcall it, play the Peak Griffin, put all of that in from both of their skills, and more than likely use the clean sweep if we'd like. We can also, instead of overcalling, select our own units for the clean sweep, so that you can get a little bit more value out of those units. And we can just go ahead and swing in here. We can Soul Blast out 3, put 1 back, retire, crit, distribute 5k, and then check crit, check PG, check draw a card. Have a pretty decent hand here for next turn. Swing in pretty big, swing in pretty big, and have a pretty decent guarding hand. And that's basically how it goes for Unica. You want this to happen as soon as possible. You have all the tools to make sure. Oftentimes, it's not so much about getting it from drop that matters. It's just actually being able to get it out from deck, which is why I would advise playing maybe more soul charging cards. So it's really dependent on how you feel. There's a lot of different ways you can go with this. I didn't mention in the options, but of course you can throw in stuff like Brainwash Swirler or Amazement Magician. Any other ways that you want to soul charge is fine, but I feel hesitant to put in a lot of ways to soul charge because you don't really want to lose all of your potential triggers. You just want to make sure you get the 3. You will eventually get the other 3 that you can cycle in, so you at least have some, triggers to actually check. But anyways, that's the sample play. That does it for Unica. I think it is a rather decent deck. I've tested it a bit against Chronojet and Eva mainly, and she can, keep up with them to an extent. In the late game, she gets blown out really easily, so you definitely want to be more aggressive with it. You can maybe focus more of that aggression running grade 1s, like taking out the Siri that I have for more grade 1s that you can try and rush with and get some early pressure in. Eva, it's the same deal. You have the clean sweep to deal with their obstacles, which hurts them a good amount, but in the late game, past turns 4, Eva catches up really easily, and it's really hard for Unica to close out the game. But I think she's a really solid deck. When it comes to later on in set 10 with the Mask Unica, she gets a rather different skill where instead of having the 3 skills, I believe she gets only a crit if you Soul Blast out or you remove the original Unica, and she instead can actually restand one of your units. So the deck changes up a little bit at that point, because not only do you have to make space for the new Unica if you're still playing the old one, I believe you have to specifically have it at least in your ride deck so you can ride over it, because you have to ride over Unica with it. You need the Mask to be able to search it out. You also want the Dragon Tree markers as well, or at least the guy that lets you search out the Mask. But then you also have the capability to restand, so you can play stuff like the Queen Lu, for example, which is something I really wanted to consider here. But you don't really need to, because more than often your opponent is going to be guarding with 2 triggers or something like that. So it's not really necessary, but you can have it have more pressure in the mask version. But in any case, till next time, take care of yourself, play Vanguard, and have yourself a damn good one.